guys, it's Christy, and today I'm going to be talking about character, specifically how a character's actions can illustrate their true nature. So I am a huge fan of Broadway musicals, and so I was so excited to talk about one of my favorites and use it as an example of today's topic. If you haven't already seen Les Miserables, just be aware that I'm going to be covering some major plot points in this video. So, Les Miserables is a historical novel set in 19th century France. I'm going to be using the 2012 film adaptation of the Broadway musical. The story follows the character Jean Valjean, who has been imprisoned for the last 19 years. His initial sentence was the result of stealing a loaf of bread for his sister and her son to keep them from starving. The story opens as Jean Valjean is finally released with the caveat that he must wear the brand of a convict forever, something the Inspector Javert is a little too keen to remind him.
Yes, 24601.
My name is Jean Valjean.
Right away, this character is painted as a criminal, at least according to the law, even though the crime and punishment don't sit well with the audience. Jean Valjean searches for work with no success. He is turned away everywhere he goes until he is taken in and shown kindness by a bishop. Having lost hope that he can turn his life around or make a new name for himself, he decides his best bet is to rob the bishop and take the bishop's silverware. When he is captured by the police and returned to the bishop for prosecution, the bishop surprisingly absolves Jean Valjean, telling the police that the silverware was a gift. Astonishingly, he gives Jean Valjean 2 extra silver candlesticks.
You must use this precious silver to become an honest man.
This single man, who could have condemned him, decides instead to save not only the man, but his soul. This moment affects Jean Valjean deeply, and he begins to pose the question he asks throughout the story: who am I? A criminal, or perhaps something more?
Take an eye for an eye. Turn your heart into stone. This is all I have lived for. This is all I have known.
Later in the story, as Jean Valjean has now become a wealthy man of power, a townsman is trapped under a fallen cart, and no one is willing or able to rescue the man. Valjean, having a gift of incredible strength, lifts the cart off of the man, attracting the attention of Javert, who is reminded of the convict who broke his parole. This selfless act of Valjean's sets his manhunt into motion as Javert, a man married to the righteousness of the law, is determined to capture him. Javert confronts Valjean, saying that another man has been identified as the fugitive. This is another moment where our main character is heavily weighing his options. He could let the man be condemned to a life of imprisonment in his place, or he could damn himself to that life.
Who am I? Who am I?
Jean Valjean.
It is the first moment where I believe we truly see this character for who he is, and that he is willing to lay down his life in place of another when he identifies himself. Meanwhile, one of Jean Valjean's employees, a young woman working to send funds to her daughter's caretakers, gets fired and turned toward a life of prostitution. When Jean Valjean finds her dying in the street, his heart breaks for her, and he determines that he will look after the child. He escapes Javert's grasp in order to set things right with Fantine and her daughter, and rescues little Cosette from her mistreating caretakers who demand payment in return for her. Years later, a grown Cosette and Valjean are living new identities in Paris. He has never told her of his past, afraid that this will change her opinion of him. A series of events takes place that puts Valjean back in Javert's sights, and he determines they must run again, even though Cosette has fallen in love with a man named Marius. Valjean learns from Marius's love letter to Cosette that he will be fighting in what will become the Paris uprising, and he is likely to not make it out alive. This doesn't sit well with Valjean, as he loves Cosette like his child. He intends to see Marius come out alive and make it back to her. Meanwhile, Javert infiltrates the barricade as a spy. Valjean has gained the trust of the rebels and volunteers to execute him. Having Javert in his grasp, he holds the power to free himself of this man and his life of running. Instead, he gives him his life and releases Javert. It is another pivotal moment in the story, reflecting on the dichotomy of law versus morality. That just because someone follows the law does not make him a good person. In his final act of selflessness, Valjean carries a wounded Marius from the barricade and drags him through the sewers and into safety, then leaving him and Cosette so they are free from association to his crimes. Jean Valjean is such an amazing character because time and again he is faced with unfortunate circumstances, and it is his moral compass that leads his selfless actions. But it is not just the actions themselves that make the audience root for him. It is his deliberation and temptation to do the wrong thing, to do what is self-serving, that makes him understandable and relatable. He is not a saint. He is beloved because we can see his struggle, and yet he chooses benevolence, regardless of the ramifications to himself. Another day, another destiny is another of my favorite lines in this musical. It paints the idea that our character is not defined by a single moment, but by the decisions we make every day. Throughout your story, your character will be defined by the sum of their decisions and not their own definition of themselves, or the brand that society has placed upon them. Les Miserables has some amazing characters, and these themes are really present throughout all of them, but I feel that Jean Valjean is really the best example. This musical definitely gives me chills every single time I watch it, so if you haven't already, I definitely recommend either get the movie and watch it, or if the musical is ever coming to town, definitely go and see it, because it is an experience that you won't forget and you'll be so glad that you went to see it. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll also enjoy the one I did recently using Pride and Prejudice as an example of how to build romantic tension. So if you're writing a story with a romance in it and you're looking for some inspiration, definitely check that video out. I'll link it down below. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this one, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.